Same old man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Wow, so serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 597 for August 12, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Brendan, it is time to reevaluate this podcast.
I thought you were about to say reevaluate our lives. Which I think
Our
we have to do every
lives,
day.
we could do that too. Reevaluate everything that we're up to these days.
We got to rethink some things. We've been doing
Yeah.
this for over 10 years. Maybe we should change
Yeah.
course.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been up to this shenaniganery for quite some time.
Is that a new word you just invented? Shenaniganery?
Maybe. It perhaps that is.
I like it. I like that.
That's how you know you've been doing this for a long time. You just start to make up words because you've used them all. It's been 11 years. There's no
I know.
other words left.
I feel like our vocabulary has hit like that breaking point where it can't go anywhere but stay where it is. So you have to start inventing words to sound
Yeah.
even smarter. And then, of course, the
Yeah.
listeners out there who are smarter than any one of us combined will notice that and just stop listening. So
Yeah.
it's just going to alienate more people.
Exactly. Well, this week's show is going to be interesting. We are going to be talking about movies that are being reevaluated. We briefly mentioned this last week with The Village. That's a film, or M. Night Shyamalan on the whole has been reevaluated quite a bit in recent years.
A lot of
The
filmmakers fall
Village
into this.
being
Yeah.
one of the biggest films in his specific filmography. And I noted last week that I have been a proponent of The Village and its reevaluation. I recently revisited
Very
that
good
film
movie.
and
So
loved
good.
it. In particular, the ending. I've always really liked The Village, but like most, when the film came out in 2004, I was conflicted about that ending, but I've fully come around on The Village.
Honestly, it's a good problem to have when you reevaluate a movie yourself and you realize, oh, I severely underrated this. And we're also two critics that do these annual retrospectives through the decade. And then we look back and think, crap, did I make a mistake when we did our 2004 retrospective?
And that's what's so interesting about doing this exercise and watching films multiple times. And when you're leading up to a retrospective, there's the first experience that you may have had with the film some years ago, and we're at the year 2000. So in the case of some of these films, it might be 20 years since we've seen these movies.
For sure. Yeah.
And even if you've caught up with them over the years, you're always constantly evolving as a critic anyway, or as a cinephile. So yeah, these lists, or the way we think about these movies, that's why I've always considered this podcast, especially the retrospectives though, a time capsule, like a fascinating time capsule.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And this is how I felt about these films when we recorded them.
I think it was
specific time.
I think it was Roger Ebert that once said that ratings and rankings, they're only relative, not absolute. And I think that's a great way of putting it, because you're right. They are a time capsule. I think that's the best analogy to make here. I was thinking of another analogy that I don't think quite fits in that, but I think calling them, because I was going to call them a work in progress in some ways. And I guess in ways they kind of are, because we're always changing as people. So they're going to change these opinions we have, these rankings of movies, these analyses we do. They're going to change and shift, and new perspectives are going to come in. So they will change in that way, but it's kind of fun, like back in the day when I used to do these top 10 lists for any year, I felt like my goal was to always get it right off the bat. So that way, like 20 years later, I felt like I never had to change anything. But now that's just silly. Like, that's not the way to go about it. Once you learn to accept that, I feel like you become a better critic as a result.
Exactly. And when we did best of the decade for the 2010s, I'm trying to recall if we did a post on the website, or maybe this was just on Letterboxd, but I did go back and I updated my top 10s for all of those years. And maybe it was something we discussed on the show. I'm trying to recall.
Yeah, pretty sure we did.
And
we talked
I
about
will
how
be like pretty soon. I'm going to be coming up with the format of how I want to do that show, and it'll be pretty similar to the best of the decade episode we did for the 2010s.
Yeah.
And that'll be something we'll do early next year ish. And so I am looking forward to doing that, and whether it be something that we put up on the website or on Letterboxd, I'll probably go back and update my rankings for all of these years, because
I think I will too.
The Village came out in 2004, I believe, right?
That is correct. Yeah.
I'm looking at my list right now for 2004, and The Village is not in my top 20.
See, that's a problem.
Now, and again, I don't, when we did that retrospective, and this would have been what, 5 years ago now?
No, I think it was a little bit less than that. I think it was around 3 years ago. Maybe 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago. I don't know. I don't know how to do math anymore.
Yeah, math, it escapes you once you get beyond 19 years old.
Yeah. But yeah,
at any rate, it's been 4 or 5 years, and I don't even recall if I rewatched The Village for that retrospective. I might not have, and I'm curious, even if I did then, if it would have changed anything. I don't know, because I do think the evolution of where I'm at now is the right time for me personally, to revisit The Village. And now that I've seen it, I love it. It's not on my list. It absolutely will jump into like looking at it now, just off the cuff.
2004 was a hard year to get right.
It is a surprisingly deep year. I know people talk about 2007 is the best year for that decade, and it is. But 2004 has got to be pretty close.
I think when we get to episode 600 and we talk about like our top 10 of this particular decade, the 2000s, we may have to go back and talk about what specific years we thought were the best. And I think 2007 and 2004 are probably the two that jump out the most for me. And this is another great example, because there are at least 13 or 14 films that I think are top 10 eligible. And I'm using quotes around that because I think they're at least that good. The Village is one of them that would probably be in my newly updated top 10. And we might talk about this particular filmmaker further on in this conversation, because I think he's a great topic for movies getting reevaluated. But someone like Tony Scott, he also had a film come out this year, Man on Fire, with Denzel Washington. I recently caught up with that not too long ago when I guested on the Awards Watch podcast during their Tony Scott series. I talked about Deja Vu with them specifically, but I wanted to get more context and revisit Man on Fire. And man, that movie is incredible. It's good. It's really good. Yeah, no, I love both of those movies. Man on Fire is a film. I'm not sure if I'm as high on it as Jay is. He really champions that film as Tony Scott's best movie. And it really is great. I'm not sure. Well, actually, I did do a Tony Scott ranking not too long ago. I could go and look that up as I talk here. I am still adamant that Top Gun is his best movie. I think it is one of the best movies of the 80s, good movie. Not just Tony Scott. I think it is that good. Tony Scott does not have a bad movie. I don't think he really does.
He
might not. He's got some mediocre movies.
You talk about reevaluation. He could be a big part of this entire conversation, because
he might be the thesis in many ways. I mean, I know interestingly, we were using M. Night Shyamalan and even Miami Vice as really the basis for this topic, but I mean, Tony Scott is kind of the leader of the pack in many ways. I feel like it's not just us; it's many people in our circle that are going back to his films and really noticing this guy kind of kicked ass. He really did.
Yeah, he really rolls. Yeah, I have Deja Vu at 4 and Man on Fire 5 on my list. With Enemy of the State, Crimson Tide. They are 2 and 3. But look, those 4 films, my 2 through 5, interchangeable. You can put them in any order you want. I'll be happy with it. I don't think any of them trumps Top Gun, but all 4 very, very good movies. But yeah, I mean, the rest of his filmography, I think, can be classified as quite underrated as well.
Yeah,
I look. I even went on the record to say I like Beverly Hills Cop 2 more than the first one. So hey, take that for what it's worth, I guess.
It's a fun movie as a vehicle for Eddie Murphy. It just works. It just sizzles. It really does.
I think it's funnier than the original, and I know that's blasphemy, but
I can certainly agree with that. I don't think it's a better movie than the original, but I do think it's funnier.
Yeah. Anyway, that is to say, Tony Scott is certainly probably going to be a big part. We've already gone further into this than I intended. I just simply wanted
I don't think we need to talk about it again. I think we already sort of dug deep into Tony Scott.
That's what we're doing on this show. We'll get to that more here in just a little bit before we get too deep down the rabbit hole here. We don't have to spend too much on this segment, but is the parade on or off? I did want to quickly talk about the box office. Coming off the heels of Deadpool and Wolverine that is making a gajillion dollars. Well, there was a new movie that starred Deadpool's wife. Are you aware of this, Brendan?
Yeah. It Ends With Us, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yep. And while we could spend hours circling through all of the TikTok theories as to the behind the scenes around this film, I don't know if you're aware of any of that, Brendan.
A few, but then I got bored.
I think it's utterly fascinating. The marketing has been strange. It's been very weird. Blake Lively has been in and out of the marketing. I feel like I saw more Hugh Jackman in the marketing for It Ends With Us than I did Blake Lively herself. It was very weird. They were in this. The only thing I could think of, Brendan, not that we are the first or the only ones to say this, but generally, what was one of the big talking points last year? Hollywood is going to take the wrong lessons from Barbenheimer. You can't force it. You can't contrive it. But that's what they've tried to do.
Yeah.
With Deadpool and Wolverine, and now It Ends With Us, they wanted to combine the efforts of those two films into a big box office push. And look, I don't think that the marketing was effective in terms of the discourse. Most of the talking around It Ends With Us was how weird this all is.
Yeah, that's in a way, that's what kind of sold the movie.
Yes, and the blatant power struggle at play with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively trying to push her for some sort of Oscar nomination and everything that was thrown out there. But you can't deny that it did work to some degree. It did get people to the theaters.
It did. Yeah, it did very well for the kind of movie that it was. In fact, I think I have some of the stats up here, but I think it's the highest opening, the highest domestic opening for an original non-IP movie for this year thus far. I think it made
50 million domestically. 50
That's not for a movie
million.
Like that. That's pretty
crazy.
Darn good.
That's very good for that movie. Like without the Deadpool and Wolverine bump, it's what, a third of that maybe. I would venture off to say.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this story is more interesting than talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, which is now it's now part of the $1 billion club, as we know. It's doing very well. We knew that, but it's fascinating to see how a movie like It Ends With Us is doing as well as it is, given the type of movie that it is.
Yes.
And I think that's a more interesting story as we're focusing on.
Absolutely, and also to throw it in there, the international box office for that film wasn't bad either. So collectively, it has $80 million. $80 million.
And what was the budget on this? It was pretty modest, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's see if I can find it real fast.
25 million?
25. Yep, there you go. That's wild.
I think that's
so. Yeah,
I mean, given how this works, I think that's already, from what I understand, that's already a break-even point. Because
and
it can't just be a doubling of that in order to break even. It's got to be a certain like threshold above. I think it's like you multiply it by 3 to get a good range as to where a movie needs to break even, given all the marketing costs and other expenses that surround that. Which means that this movie already break even in one weekend.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And I don't want to discredit the book that it's based on, which was a big hit as well. Colleen Hoover's novel was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to have its fans. Like people would have been interested to go see that movie simply because of Hoover's book. But I don't think it would have been $80 million worth.
No.
I think it's fair to say. I don't think that's unfair. As, heralded as the novel might be, I don't think that it would have gotten through simply on that alone.
It's the Blake Lively / Ryan Reynolds of it all. That certainly does add the biggest push here that it certainly needed to get to where it was. And I think it's also really funny because, these were the top 2 highest grossing movies of the weekend, at least domestically, if I'm not mistaken. And technically Blake Lively was in both of them. So I guess we can kind of spoil it a little bit and say, she's got a vocal cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine. I think most of us probably expected that would be in the movie somewhere. It's not critical for how that film works. It's just a neat little gag to try and find. But she's technically in both of them if you want to get through the semantics of it all.
It is. And I haven't seen the film. I can't speak to the quality of it at all. So I have no idea. I'm not even sure if I'll get to it this year, if I'm being perfectly honest. I don't know if it's a film that you plan on catching up with.
I think I've got other priorities. Maybe I'll watch it with my wife when it's available somewhere. That feels like the kind of film that will go to Netflix at some point. Oh, maybe not anytime soon because of how it's doing in the box office. That might change its plans. I don't know what its plans originally were, but I could see that going to some streaming platform for at least a little while, and that's probably where I'll catch up with it.
Yeah, I might watch it on a Netflix or wherever it lands on streaming sometime early next year. I haven't read the novel. It's based on the subject material is obviously very serious, and I'm curious how the film handles that. But I mean, I find the narrative around this film interesting for the behind the scenes, them trying to contrive some sort of Barbenheimer thing here. And it did work to some degree. But
the reviews are they're not great, but they're not terrible either.
Yeah,
from what
it's
I
like
understand.
middling.
Yeah,
I think it had like a 59 on Rotten Tomatoes. Metacritic wasn't too far off.
Somewhere in the 50s, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So middling reviews, and that's why ultimately I think because of the reviews, the trailer I think was average. I don't think it was great by any means. That's why without the Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't think the film ends up with 80 million.
Right.
I don't even know if it ends up with half that. But and again, I don't think it was the marketing itself. Some of the videos that they threw out there were charming and funny. I don't know if that was enough though. I think people went to see this because of the controversies. And the behind the scenes and the power manipulation. Like I think that's ultimately what drove. And that's
I think you're right. I think you're right.
That's not the marketing doing its job as much as there's just a lot of spilling tea that has people intrigued. Those are two different things.
It is, but it's also generated by the people. So there is a grassrootsy aspect to it. It's not really a grassroots marketing
maybe that's
campaign.
Where it is.
So maybe that's where the Barbenheimer, I guess, comparison could be made. It's just the difference is we, the people, concocted a marketing ploy for those two movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer specifically. Here, it wasn't a marketing ploy; it was controversy. It was it was some type of
and maybe
theory.
That's why I find it. I think that's why in my brain it doesn't equate as to the same when you think of Dune or Barbenheimer. There was an anticipation of excitement.
Well, that was them. That was interest in the movie. This was interest in an idea
and
surrounding
the drama
the movie.
behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a very different
which is
thing.
different.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
At any rate, financially successful though. however you want to put it, it's done
It
well.
is. So I guess that means the parade is on with a bit of an asterisk, but then there's
Well,
another movie
that's-
we can talk about, which I think you're
That's
about
exactly-
to transition to, where I
Yeah,
guess we can
no.
argue the parade might be at a bit of a. Well, I mean, I don't know. The general parade is probably still on because Deadpool Wolverine is doing so well.
Yeah.
I
It
don't
hit a
think the
bump
mo-
though. One
it-
of the floats in the parade just completely fell over. Like that's
It
caught
did.
on fire.
It did. I guess the question is now, we were talking about movies like Inside Out 2 at a point, and like, when's this going to hit $1.5 billion? That was the question. The
Yeah.
question here in this case is, will Borderlands be the biggest bomb of the year?
Yeah, hands down. It's certainly got to be in the conversation. I can't say definitively without doing the homework, I guess, but it had a budget of 120 million, and currently at this point it is grossed worldwide. Although I don't know how much of a worldwide release it's had so far. It might have many more markets overseas.
Yeah.
To get this film, but as it stands right now, $9.3 million. Yikes. That's not good.
That is so bad. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Eli Roth, but I actually feel bad for him with these numbers. I really do. That is troubling.
Well, maybe this is myopic because this month we just talked about earlier, and we especially noted this on our bonus content this week for those that are VIP members. It's been busy the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And I just celebrated a birthday, so I haven't been online as much as I typically am. And I might have simply missed it. I will admit that perhaps I missed it. But was there any marketing for this film? Because I didn't really see any.
It was
other than a trailer. I know they released a trailer some time ago, which wasn't good. But
I think that's
beyond
the thing.
that,
Well, I think that's the thing. Sometimes it's not just about little marketing, it's also about bad marketing. And I think in the case of Borderlands, it seemed like bad marketing because I'm with you. The trailer did not interest me in this movie. And from what I'm hearing, it may have actually been good marketing because apparently that trailer is very reflective of the final product, that it's not very good. So I guess you can kind of argue that it's both good and bad marketing. And I think in this case, it just wasn't the right kind of, it didn't create the right kind of draw that it needed. And it's also funny. I think we as an audience, and I don't mean just us that are part of this film critic world, I think general audiences as well, they're getting smarter. They're becoming able to realize when movies are maybe pulling from different properties and IPs too obviously. And Borderlands is clearly trying to tackle, a Guardians of the Galaxy type thing, right?
Yes,
A Suicide
yes.
Squad type thing.
yes.
And I think a lot of people going into any movie are going to see that trailer and think this just looks like a ripoff. And these are people that probably don't even know that it's based off of a video game. That doesn't even matter. It just doesn't create the right interest, and that could be a great reason for it, I guess.
Well, and that's the thing. I feel like the marketing for Guardians, for the Suicide Squad, at least did a good job of bringing some sort of vigor to the table and understanding as to who these characters might be to some degree or another, that I thought was intriguing. Borderlands did not have very much marketing to begin with. And you then couple that with, well, who are these characters? What are they capable of? Why should I come see them? Where's that as well? Like, I feel like you need to throw some of that in there. And again, I'm willing to chalk it up to maybe it's there and I missed it, but I don't recall seeing anything for this film other than a trailer that was released online like a month ago. They
did play some ties for the film in theaters as like a mini trailer to introduce other trailers. In my experience, they almost felt like they kind of had like almost like a Minions type thing it was going for. And maybe that's because I don't know the robot character's name from Borderlands. I know he's voiced by Jack Black, and apparently, from what I've heard, he might be the most annoying character in a movie since Jar Jar Binks. But like they were using him as like a minions type thing to sort of interject the marketing for other movies in the theater. But aside from that, and of course the trailer you're talking about, yes, I did not see much outside of that. It was very little marketing.
Yeah. Either way, it has not been good. $10 million. Less than that. 9.3 as it stands.
It's
on
not
a film
it's
with
not
a budget
going
of
to
$120 million.
It's not going to make much more. It's not going to make much more because it still has Deadpool and Wolverine to compete with, and then Alien Romulus coming out this weekend. Those are the two movies that are going to take it away. It's dead in the water. It's dead in the water.
Their only hope is to, as many films have done, to release that on demand as soon as possible and try to recoup what they can. Yeah. And that's likely what's going to happen. It'll probably end up on demand in 2 weeks' time.
We'll see an announcement that it comes out this weekend.
Maybe as soon as this weekend. We're not even going to compete with Romulus or The Crow. We're going straight to on demand. It looks so bad. I had no interest in seeing the film. I saw very little to maybe zero discussion around the film, other than people asking why Cate Blanchett is in the film. I hope that she got paid. That's all that. Well, the one talking point everyone kept saying is, this is exactly what would happen to Lydia Tarr. This is where she ends up. And I was like, yes, this is what happens to Lydia Tarr.
I would totally see this movie if she was actually playing Lydia Tarr.
Maybe she is. Maybe she's gone extremely meta as Lydia Tarr.
Yeah. Okay. Now I want to see it just with that kind of mindset. That'll make me like the movie more than for the wrong reasons. But anyway, I'm not interested in it.
Anyway, that is a lot to say. The parade is still very much on, minus the slight hurdle. We had one float,
crash and burn.
Combust into flames, and it's gone. But generally, we're still on.
Yeah.
We're still very much on.
We're still on.
Okay, we have to talk about it, Brendan. Let's bring up some D23. We joked last week that Marvel might not do anything. And perhaps we can expand this out because there was a lot revealed at D23, broadly speaking. But when it comes to Marvel, it is funny to me because we were sitting here going, surely they're going to do something because there's nothing. There's only a handful of films between now and Secret Wars, which is expansive. So where are these characters coming from? Because right now the only X-Men characters we've been introduced were in Deadpool, and we don't know what the future of those characters really holds. So
exactly.
D23, surely this is going to be the time for Marvel to come out and go, look, between now and Secret Wars, we're going to add these things.
It's like, we know you have questions. Hold my beer is what I thought this was going to be. And nope.
They said, we're fine. We're totally good.
Which makes me think the reason why they didn't delve further into the questions that we have about Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars coming out when they are 2026 and 2027 respectively. We know they're not going to make those release dates. We know they have other movies in between there. Some of them are still, from what I understand, to be determined, if I'm not mistaken. I think this just proves Marvel Studios, they don't know what they're doing yet in leading up to Secret Wars and Doomsday. But what they do know are some of these D+ properties that are coming. So let's just focus on what we know, which in a way, I kind of appreciate that because now they won't get into trouble and backpedal on something that they announced too soon, which they might end up doing, having what they did with Robert Downey Jr. at Comic-Con anyway. So they just focused on Daredevil Born Again, Agatha All Along, Captain America Brave New World, Fantastic Four, and we got some new things about that. And it seems fun. Some of these things I'm still pretty interested in, but I still have questions about the overall direction of where they're going, which I think is hilarious.
I agree. I all the questions that I brought up last week that I truly thought, at least in some way, I didn't think they would fully answer everything, but
Yeah.
I do think they would address this gaping chasm of characters that make up Secret Wars. How, like, where are they? They're simply disappeared, like, or they're not, they don't exist yet in the MCU.
Right.
They didn't address it at all. They simply regurgitated what we already know about all of those aforementioned films and shows that you brought up. And I will say the Daredevil Born Again stuff looked really great. I am very much looking forward to that. I thought that was maybe the most intriguing and probably the most information that we got on anything that we didn't already know. Because they did release some footage. They released some photos. The crew got to be there on stage, which they didn't really do at Comic-Con. So that was interesting to see. Michael Giacchino did play some of his score for Fantastic Four, which I really liked. I love Giacchino. The man can do no wrong.
He's at the point now where he's starting to recycle a lot of his similar motifs, but at the same time, I'm a big defender of these Marvel movies needing more melodically recognizable scores, which I think they tend to underdeliver on that department quite a bit.
So recently, especially,
and you know, when we see big movies like that, we want some type of melodic memorability, right? You know, like the ET effect. And most of them haven't had that. So even though I think what I've heard from Giacchino with regard to Fantastic Four, it's like, okay, this sounds very Giacchino. He's doing a lot of his same things again, but Marvel needs something like that.
But
so
I love it.
I'm okay with it. Yeah.
I'm totally okay with it as well. So that was very exciting. The other thing that left me intrigued, I guess, was the Ironheart stuff. And that's because you were able to get people on stage, which I thought was exciting. And while I don't think Ironheart is going to move the needle all that much in terms of phase 5, how that's crystallizing, and we're moving into 6 again, whatever that means.
Yeah.
We don't know many of these characters, but Ironheart, I feel like, will have a role with Young Avengers if that's something that they're going to do. That's also been teased and it's out there, but they haven't announced that yet.
I know.
Like, I thought maybe that would be something that they're going to do, and
which means they probably just don't know what they're doing with it yet. They have the breadcrumbs there, but they don't have the vision quite yet.
Yeah. You know, but what I did love is that they bring out Ryan Coogler, and
which was great.
He has some contagious enthusiasm, and he's talking about Ironheart and what makes the character so special and interesting. And I think in terms of what is there on paper, the passion that is seemingly poured into this series, all of that is great. I love it. I think it could be great. If it was a movie, I am still dubious, though, because this is going to be a miniseries on Disney Plus, and the 6-8 episode arcs that they've been doing with these series is just ineffective.
It's not working.
Just not
it's
good.
not working. Yeah.
It's not working. And until they change the format.
Well, maybe this one will work a little bit better, Ironheart in particular, because we've at least gotten to see the character already.
Yes, we do know her to some degree, yes.
Yeah. It's in a way, they sort of treated her in Black Panther Wakanda Forever similar to how we were introduced to Black Panther himself in Civil War. You know, it was an introductory point. So when their arc starts, we've at least gotten some familiarity with the vibe they're going for with that character. And I think that's why Ms. Marvel, as another example, sort of failed, because in many regards, that was the first time we got to be introduced to that character and that world.
Yes.
That happened with a lot of these D+ shows. So Ironheart, if it's doing the same format once again, it at least has a bit of an advantage by comparison. So maybe I can be a little bit optimistic there. I don't know, but we'll see how that goes.
Yes. So I'm still dubious, but I really do hope that Ryan Coogler enthusiasm is in the show, and that the passion that they're pouring into this does fully realize that character and what they're trying to do with that show, whatever that is. I hope
he's not directing any of the episodes.
No, he's executive producing.
Okay.
He's not directing, but he was one of the main voices on stage talking about the character, which is why I bring it up, because if you watch the footage, he was very passionate about it.
Yeah.
But to emphasize, right now, all we have is Captain America: Brave New World, where everyone wants to salivate over the Red Hulk. I was trying to be PG-13 about it.
He's sexy, man. He's sexy.
Yes. So
that's the sexy bacon there.
Yeah, we have the Red Hulk in Brave New World. We have the Thunderbolts, and then you get Daredevil boarding in, Ironheart, Agatha all along, which I don't think any of those shows will impact where the larger MCU is moving. And then we get to Fantastic Four next year. Blade, maybe. They didn't even announce or do anything with Blade, which means that film is not happening. It's just
is it done?
Exit I think off the schedule. I don't think it's officially canceled, but
I think they're talking about
that. They didn't say anything about it, unless I missed it. But I don't think they did. But anything was said.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're having internal conversations. I would love to be the fly on the wall there. I wouldn't be surprised if they are secretly talking about just nixing that movie altogether at this point.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
According to this, filming is expected to take place in Mexico, the United Kingdom, and in Atlanta. It is scheduled to be released November 7th, 2025.
That's not happening.
I highly doubt that's happening.
That's not happening.
Yes, that is
not happening.
At any rate, so let's just assume it's not happening. Okay?
Yeah.
It's not. So all we have are those two movies I mentioned, Brave New World, Thunderbolts, and again, the Disney Plus shows, which will have little effect on the larger MCU, I think. And then you get Fantastic Four, and that's it. And the next movie we get is Avengers Doomsday. Okay. Doomsday is apparently going to introduce all of the X-Men and everything we need to know about Secret Wars, because that is the only thing that leads us into Secret Wars in 2027 as it stands right now.
Did you see the leaked proposal for the Kang Dynasty that came out a week or so ago?
Yes, I did see that.
Which was going to focus primarily on the 3 Spider-Men from No Way Home. I wouldn't be surprised, and this is something I think I talked about last week, that Avengers Doomsday is going to primarily focus on existing characters we already know from other movies outside of the MCU specifically. So that way it doesn't necessarily have to do that introductory work just yet.
Yeah.
Or Marvel is really hiding something around Captain America: Brave New World and Fantastic Four. There might be very crucial pivots in those movies that we're just underestimating.
Well, and that's a great point, and something we somewhat teased last week in terms of what could they be hiding. Now, I was a little facetious and going, well, they've already shot X-Men movie, and they're going to announce that. Like, okay, it wasn't quite that, but I think you're right, especially because Secret Wars is scheduled for 2027. That is 3 years from now.
Yeah.
And if all you have are 3 movies, again, assuming Blade is never coming to the screens, you have 3 films next year, right? Brave New World, Thunderbolts, and Fantastic Four. Baby's First Steps. I'm going to keep calling it that. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to keep calling it Baby Steps and hopefully think that Bill Murray shows up as Bob.
Yeah, it's about my son Andrew. He's in the Fantastic Four.
It's about babies. I love it. It's so adorable.
So you have those 3 films coming out next year, and the only movie slated for 2026 is Doomsday. Is that really going to be Marvel's plan? Probably not, right? Probably not.
It seems a little. It does seem similar to what DC tried doing with Justice League. It really does.
Yeah. Like
I think
I think you're absolutely right, Brennan. I think they're holding cards in their pocket.
Yeah.
And they want to wait for Captain America to come out, maybe Thunderbolts as well, but especially Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four, Captain America. Once those films are released, floodgates. Here's everything that we're going to do leading up to Secret Wars in 2027.
I think they need to see how these films do and how they're received to see if the problems that have existed and plagued most of Phase 5 and 6 are still going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't really think too much about that last week, but that makes a lot of sense. I was really expecting that they would announce something at D23. But I think you are right. I think that equally makes as much sense. Wait to see what those films reveal and then go from there.
Well, yeah, because the more that they reveal, the more they shoot themselves in the foot, apparently. And I think they're learning that the hard way now.
Yes, absolutely. So,
yeah.
At any rate, moving away from Marvel, is there anything else from D23 that tickled your fancy at all?
I forget who. I think you retweeted this, but someone tweeted out there, D23 in a nutshell, and it showed the Muppets. Let's make a sequel. Let's make a sequel.
We're doing a sequel.
Which, okay,
that's Hollywood in a nutshell, yeah.
That is Hollywood in a nutshell, and that is mostly what we got. And I don't want to underplay the fact that from an animation standpoint, especially from Pixar, we are getting some original content. We're getting Elio for sure. And apparently some of the stuff they showed for that was pretty positive, if I'm not mistaken. And there's this original movie called Hoppers that apparently is about a young girl that trades her brain in for a robot beaver to explore the animal kingdom.
Yeah,
which is one of the silliest concepts I've ever seen. I still don't understand it, and yet I welcome that kind of originality. So there are things like that, and then it's completely offset by the announcement that, okay, we're actually getting Incredibles 3. And when I hear that...
Which you're not a fan of, I guess. Or are you?
Well, I'd want to hear from Brad Bird about it because I heard he's developing it. Does that mean he's also directing it?
I don't know. I would assume so. He did the first 2. He's got to come back for the third one. There's no way he's going to let someone else round out that trilogy. Absolutely no chance.
He had so many things that he was potentially working on, like Ray Gunn, and then this potential musical with Michael Giacchino that just seems so interesting. And even during the press for Incredibles 2, he was asked a lot about Incredibles 3, and he would always say, no, I'm not doing it. I am done. He was basically pulling like a Daniel Craig, I would rather slit my wrist than do another James Bond movie moment. He was almost replicating his own PG version of it. So the fact that he might be the one helming Incredibles 3, I want to hear from his mouth why he's interested in this, because that's the thing that gives me pause.
According to this, it is confirmed to be in development with Brad Bird returning as director. That's what this says. That's what I'm reading here. Now, maybe you're right. Maybe we have to hear from the horse's mouth first.
Yeah.
Instead of hearing it through Deadline and Variety and these various outlets. But that's what they're reporting. So
yeah. That's what I'm curious to hear. I want to hear, I want to sense his passion. I want to sense his reason for making this. And I trust that he'll still make a good movie. He's a great filmmaker. Yeah. He's a very interesting filmmaker. I love Incredibles 2. I thought that was really good.
Yes, it's great. It's one of Pixar's best in the 2010s for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's why I am excited for him to come back. I was hesitant about an Incredible sequel to begin with. I did not need it. I don't need Pixar to be giving us sequels to these beloved films that are wonderful. And I felt the same way about Inside Out, right? I don't need an Inside Out 2. And then it comes out and I really do like it. I was hesitant about Incredibles 2. I loved it. I thought it was really great. And if there is going to be a third, if they're going to round out a trilogy, I don't want it to be in anyone else's hands. I want Brad Bird to have his trilogy. A lot of directors have their trilogies, especially these days.
Yeah.
Let him have his, and then he can move on to whatever the next project is.
Let me then say it this way, and this maybe is a double-edged sword then, because if he wants to just have this trilogy and then he can move on to other things, then I certainly can understand the joy and the excitement around this for other reasons. But I also think the joy of Incredibles 2 was the fact that it came out quite far removed from that first film.
That's true.
And I think that when there's a long-awaited sequel, especially with regard to Pixar and these really popular films, that adds a bit of a charm. And I think that's what scares me about the Toy Story franchise nowadays, but that's what made that first trilogy of Toy Story films so great for me, was how far removed they were from each other. Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 was like 11 years apart. And I feel like with Incredibles 3
we might get.
Maybe. We don't have a release date from what I understand yet.
We don't have a release date. It simply says it's in development. We know animation takes years and years.
Oh, these movies take 5 years to make, so you're not wrong.
Fully compose.
It could be a full decade between Incredibles 2 and Incredibles 3. Yeah.
We're already 6 years removed from The Incredibles 2, which is hard to believe that it's been that long. By the time this film comes out,
I feel like
probably be at that 10, 11 year mark.
I feel like I just died for a moment. You just scared the living crap out of me right now. Oh my gosh.
I know. We've all aged 6 years in the blink of an eye.
Oh,
incredible.
I am. You ever go through a midlife crisis where you just want to keep shaving your face because you don't want to showcase the gray hairs that are growing? Like I just keep maintaining the baby face because I want to look younger. And when I hear shit like this, and it's like it scares me.
No, look, I joked about it last week. It is my last year in my 30s. I am going to have my full blown midlife crisis this time next year when I look at my age and there's a 4 at the beginning of the number there.
Oh, 40 is
I'm
going
to wait to have that next year, but I'm
not even 35 yet. I still feel it.
It is crazy to think about. It's been 6 years, and because animation takes so long, if it's just now in development, we won't see that for at least another 4, maybe 5 years. So I think you will get your wish. I think it will be around that 10.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. The knowledge of it might conflate it, but then it's the wrong kind of conflation. So I think you're right. You make a good point there. But if I am going to be cynical about any of these Pixar announcements, it's absolutely around Toy Story 5. I don't think I've ever been more agitated by a simple screenshot of concept art for a movie than I have for Toy Story 5.
Yeah.
And I don't want to knock the concept because I think it's the right story to tell. The whole idea that they're going to not war, that's the wrong way to put it, but it's really a battle for
that's what I want to see. I want to see toy soldiers, but in Pixar form. I want to see them go to war.
I want to see the Terminator, but Toy Story. Basically, like the iPad is their version of Skynet, right?
Yeah.
Which in many ways, it seems like that's kind of what they're doing. This is a different evolution, and in an interesting way, the way we see an entity like Skynet or the entity from Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, that's going to end humanity potentially. It has that kind of danger. The iPad is that kind of danger for living toys when you think about it. So this might go for an almost post-apocalyptic feel from their perspective, which I think is potentially interesting. My issue is, what the hell is Woody doing there? Maybe this is just concept art. Maybe for all we know, we might get the announcement that Tom Hanks and Woody won't even be in this movie, and I might eat crow on that, although I highly doubt that they'll probably get Tom Hanks back for it. But I'm thinking, like, what's he doing there? Like these movies, like Toy Story's 4 and now 5, they refuse to acknowledge this daring idea of saying goodbye. And that is a sad thing for me when it comes to how great that original trilogy was. But anyway, I digress.
I will say, while I wholeheartedly agree with you about Woody, I don't know if you saw this or not, but one of my favorite tweets when they announced this was someone, and I can't recall the user's name, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of Woody in Toy Story 5 when Jesse shows him an iPad with a bunch of comments of kids saying something like, Woody's Roundup was never that good. and there's a photo attached, and it's Ralph from Wreck-It Ralph 2 in front of the screen talking about how he's a loser.
Okay, that's pretty great. That's pretty great.
Really good.
Pretty great.
That hits the zeitgeist in such a powerful, poignant way. Like
That'll be the opening.
Perfect.
That'll be the opening prologue. It's like, Bo Peep, I gotta go.
Yeah, I love that. But I do think this concept is fascinating because there is a realness to it that everyone will be able to appreciate, especially if you have kids. You see this dichotomy all the time, even in Andrew, who is 17 months old, but has his own iPad because we are the worst parents, I guess.
I was going to say, you actually allow that?
Well, it was, to be fair, it was Brandy's iPad that was passed on to Sam and now passed on to Andrew because Sam has his own. But he loves to watch a lot of the kids' YouTube, Andrew, that is, whether it be Blippi or whatever we're watching. And he loves watching on the iPad. And it's so fun to see him, like, he knows how to scroll through and like pick the videos he wants, even at 17 months old, which is wild. Like the studies on the human brain in another 30 years time, when we've had so many years and
that
really
hand-eye
study
coordination is going to be insane.
Like it's going to be wild. But, so I think this film is going to tap into something really interesting because yes, he has his iPad time, but Andrew also just loves to play with his toys. So there is a back and forth there, and I'm curious to see how the film handles that. But I'm also maybe most excited that they're moving beyond everything that they've already done. Like this is so new and fresh. My frustration with Toy Story 4 is that it regurgitated all of the themes from the first three films.
It was very much an extended epilogue.
Redundant.
It was an extended epilogue that was more or less repeating itself. This does feel like if anything, what they're doing here probably should have been Toy Story 4.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So maybe Woody being there is them just retconning Toy Story 4. Maybe that's all they're doing. It's kind of
frustrating because I mean, I don't care for Toy Story 4 all that much, but I mean, it's still canon. It still exists. And the idea of retconning
until Toy Story
that
5 comes out, then it's not canon anymore.
Well, but that's kind of frustrating because I know Toy Story 4 has its fans. It does have quite a few fans. So that, and I think if you were to do a poll, more people are probably more in Toy Story 4's favor than how you and I feel about it. So if it's not really a marketing or a proper marketing move from their point, if that's the case. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see where it goes. I am very mixed on it though. Especially with Woody coming back. What does that mean? But maybe it's just the concept art. Maybe that's all that is. At the same time though, I think this is way more enticing than Toy Story 4 was.
I would agree with that.
This has the potential to be a lot better and way more refreshing. And that has me at the very least intrigued and curious for that one, even though I don't think we need a Toy Story 5 or 4, but here we are.
Yeah, that's a great trilogy.
Do you have any thoughts on the Star Wars stuff? Skeleton Crew, they released a trailer for that, Andor Season 2. Any thoughts on those?
The trailer for Skeleton Crew especially, I thought it looked fine. I think my issue is that most of these Star Wars properties, from a visual standpoint, just they lack that spark that made Star Wars such an alien kind of franchise to me.
Yeah,
and I realize some people have commented on the idea of Skeleton Crew finally tackling Star Wars suburbia, right? Which I think is a really interesting idea. It just looks so much like Earth to me. And I think that's sort of my issue with it. I feel like the visual creativity is not there to justify my interest, even though I like the idea of a ragtag Goonies-like adventure in the Star Wars universe. So the idea might get me to watch it, but I'm not quite locked in yet as far as what it's presenting, especially given the reputation of how most of these Star Wars properties have looked outside of Andor, but how most of them have looked over the course of the past few years.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think my reservations simply come down to what I said about Marvel. It's the Disney Plus formula.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
If you're simply toning things down to have a fun adventure with a bunch of kids going off, creating havoc in the universe or in the galaxy, rather, if that's all this is, and it doesn't need to have, fully realized characters and plot and all that sort of stuff, then, that's fine. Maybe this will work out, but the trailer doesn't seem to suggest that. I don't think it's meant to be loose and free in that regard. So I will say the Disney Plus formula works for one person.
Yeah.
Works for one director, and we'll never get it ever, but I wish that we would, because there is one filmmaker on the planet who can take 6 episodes to create something extremely loose and disjointed and completely free, but formulate poetry behind it all. And that is one Terrence Malick. Terrence Malick would make an amazing Star Wars TV show.
I thought you were going to say David Lynch and make the
or
Twin
David
Peaks
Lynch.
comparison.
Yeah, like what those two could make it work. Everyone else, where you have to have connectivity and connective tissue, and
especially when you have multiple directors. I mean, you may have a singular creative person and executive producer and creator, but that creates potential inconsistency, which is, that was the biggest problem with The Acolyte, is just as it went along, it just became this inconsistent experience as a through line narrative. And most of these they have that same problem. And I wouldn't be surprised if Skeleton Crew has that same problem as well.
I agree. I will say I'm still very excited for Andor season 2. I loved Andor. I thought it was great. And I also love that they're capping it at season 2. This isn't something that is going to be loose and where's it going to go? There's an end. There's a vision. They know where this is going.
Well, see, that's the thing. What makes Andor so different by comparison, because that has multiple directors as well directing each episode, but that feels like it was purely the brainchild of one Tony Gilroy. Like that feels like it came from a singular mind. It was a singular vision. And I think it just goes to show how important it is to have a really good creative running things and executing that vision. It's almost like having a director for a movie is kind of how Tony Gilroy is operating there. And I think he's just more experienced than some of these other people that are running these shows.
Yep, I completely agree. The other thing about Andor season 2, and this ties to what we mentioned on our bonus content this week, which may or may not be out by the time this episode goes live. I honestly don't know. But if it's not live, we are talking about unlikable characters in film.
Yeah.
And one of the branches of that conversation was characters that we love to hate. And that's Ben Mendelsohn in Andor. I thought he was a really compelling presence in that film that maybe we didn't get enough of. So I do like that he's coming back for Andor season 2, that we're going to get to learn more about him, where he's at this time.
Very compelling in that book, Catalyst.
Yes, absolutely. So love the character, love to hate him. You love to hate the guy.
Fair.
So him coming back, I think, is going to be really exciting as well. And then there's the Mandalorian and Grogu footage that they released that circled on social media until they took it down.
Yeah. It looked like honestly, it just looked like another season of The Mandalorian.
It did, yeah. But as a movie this time.
Well, that's the thing. It didn't really look like a movie. But
It
we're
didn't.
being told
Just
that it's a movie.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's coming out, and admittedly, I thought it was intriguing. So like, it does just it looks like another season of The Mandalorian, and that's fine. But as a final outing, for those two and to crystallize that story. I think
it's basically like, yeah, it's going to be sort of like how remember the movie Serenity, which was in many ways a cinematic finale for Firefly.
Yeah,
that's more or less
exactly.
what this is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To quickly talk about a few other things here real fast, we are getting Zootopia 2. Again, we're making a sequel. So we're getting Zootopia 2. We're getting Disney Frozen 3.
Maybe Frozen 4.
Yeah, they're splitting that into 2 parts. Why? Why are they doing that?
The way they talked about that gives me pause, because it sounds like they're doing that in order to explain the things I thought was interesting about Frozen 2.
Yes, exactly. No, I love that Frozen 2 was weird. Yeah. I loved that about it. And apparently everyone at Disney was like, well, we can't have that. We can't have Annihilation as Frozen. So we're gonna fill in all these gaps. No, I don't want you to fill in the gaps. You know, someone else pointed this out as well that I thought was interesting. They show the concept art. The concept art is not the final digital rendering that we're used to, and it evokes the classic hand-drawn animation, and it is pretty stunning to look at, and it was fun to see everyone go, maybe they shouldn't have removed that division of Disney animation.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty great.
Yeah.
At any rate, so we're getting Frozen 3.
We're getting Frozen 3.
Mentioned Incredibles 3 as well. As well as
there's quite a few things.
The other Pixar film that Brennan mentioned earlier.
Yep. We've got a final a confirmed title for Avatar 3.
Oh yeah, Fire and Ash. Got to bring that up.
You know,
some people mad.
I forget who it was that said this, and I thought it was hilarious. That with all of these 5 Avatar movies, now that we're getting confirmation that Jake Sully and his family are now going to interact with the fire people of Pandora, that eventually, as this series ends, it's going to make its way to actually be a gigantic prequel for The Last Airbender.
Wouldn't that be hilarious?
That would be justifying the whole Avatar name.
That's how we get to the world and the mythology of Avatar. Is that Pandora eventually,
because they used actual avatars.
They used
kind of like the backstory of how Han Solo got his name, because his name was Han and he was on his own.
God, that's so dumb.
Terrible. Anyway, I'm looking forward to that movie. I thought The Way of Water was really good.
Well. Yeah. I know a lot of people were upset that it wasn't titled The Seed Bearer, but wasn't Fire and Ash always the title, or did they change it at a certain point?
No, I don't think it was always the title. I think it was tentatively titled The Seed Bearer at that point. So I don't think Fire and Ash was ever confirmed, at least from my recollection.
Well, it was interesting because I do remember it having the tentative title of The Seed Bearer.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was rumor or if I dreamed this. I always thought it was going to be called Fire and Ash, or at some point Fire and Ash was mentioned or rumored. I don't know. But that wasn't a new title to me.
I think what was maybe being talked about was the fact that all of these Avatar sequels are going to explore a different type of element in their title and in their overall plights. So the fact that The Way of Water was about water. So, of course, fire is going to come into play somewhere.
And then mountains, the mountain people.
The mountain people, will be the next one. Yeah, when Earth becomes part of it. So maybe that was the conversation as far as its narrative thread and how each movie is maybe going to funnel those particular elements as a focal point. I don't remember Fire and Ash.
Maybe that's it. I don't know. Maybe I'm having incredible deja vu.
Or you went ahead in time somehow. And
I was in a Tony Scott film with Denzel, and I just knew the title to this movie.
Deja vu.
Maybe that was it. I don't know. But I was not surprised by that. In fact, again, maybe it's the deja vu, but it felt like to me they went back to Fire and Ash from The Seed Bearer. That's how it felt to me.
Maybe you're right. I don't remember that,
So
but
I
you
don't
might be
know.
right. But I do think the obviousness of the fire element was going to come into play at some
Yeah,
point. Yeah,
for sure, for
I
sure.
think that was the thing. So yeah, so Avatar 3 has a title. We did get some updates on some of Disney's live action remakes that they're doing. I know we got another
For
trailer for
heaven's sake.
Mufasa, the Lion King, which it looks like there's a good story there somewhere. I will say that. I'm still struggling with the visuals of that film from what I'm seeing, but I feel like that's just par for the course with all of these live action remakes nowadays. If you even want to call them live action remakes, but they're presenting themselves as a live action like thing. So that's why I still call it that.
Yes.
But the
Even
story
though it's
seems
animation, yeah.
I mean, the story seems like there's a passionate potential there. So I'll at least give it that. The footage for Snow White looks like pure nightmare fuel. If you want my
God, yeah. It's so terrible. I guess I don't really need to expand on this a whole lot because I completely echo both of those sentiments. I think the Mufasa trailer, I don't love the visuals, but I think there's a compelling, heartwarming narrative there that could win me over in the end, despite how, I guess, how unappealing the visual layout of that film is.
Yeah.
But I do sense that Barry Jenkins' character and love and emotion. So that has me intrigued. Snow White, oh my God.
What was that?
It is
Oh my goodness.
atrocious.
Knowing that it was
absolutely disturbing. It's so bad.
I think that
So
movie's
bad.
I think that movie's primary screenwriter is Greta Gerwig as well.
Oh my, is it really?
I think so. Yeah.
Well, look, the screenwriting to Gerwig's benefit,
It's probably going to be
has
great.
nothing to do with the visuals, and the
I'm worried
writing could be very good. Yeah,
I'm worried about the Mark Webb of it. I'm not even worried about the Mark Webb of it all. I'm worried about the Disney of it all. If I'm being
exactly.
honest. Yeah.
It looks so bad. Oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch that film.
I'm
like,
scared.
It visually hurts the eyes.
It made me nervous. Watching that
Yeah.
footage that we saw made me legit anxious. And I don't think that was the
can't
intent it was going
believe
for.
They've got to stop doing this. They've got to stop.
Just
either go live action and be fully live action, or just remake it animated. I don't know.
I'll tell you what. That live action remake back in the 90s of 101 Dalmatians is looking better and better as the years go on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Anything else? D23 you want?
I guess that's it in a nutshell. I guess we could also call out that 9 Inch Nails are scoring Tron Ares.
Yes, Tron Ares, yeah.
Which I think is interesting because the members of 9 Inch Nails right now are Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, but they're crediting themselves as 9 Inch Nails, which is, it's a different entity for them, which I think is very interesting. And I'm a fan of 9 Inch Nails.
As the music guy, what do you think is the reasoning there? Because on a lot of movies, they do go by their names.
I think it's
versus 9 Inch Nails. So surely there's a reason for that, right?
Absolutely, because I would say, and for full disclosure, Atticus Ross was not part of 9 Inch Nails for the duration of them as an act. It was mostly just Trent Reznor, as well as a few other touring acts. But Atticus Ross did start producing and partaking in 9 Inch Nails albums, I think starting in like 2003, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
The way I see them, the way I see them crediting themselves as 9 Inch Nails as opposed to just Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is for two reasons. One, it allows Tron, this third movie, to announce a composer that is essentially a band, like they did with Daft Punk.
Daft Punk. Yeah.
But I do think that Trent and Atticus do see their partnership as two separate entities. I think the best comparison I can make is looking back at two of my very favorite funk and soul bands of the 1970s, Parliament and Funkadelic. But they were technically the same band. They were both run by George Clinton. They were a lot of the same circulating members throughout both of those bands, but they had two distinct sounds. It allowed one of them to be a bit more rock focused, while the other one was maybe more dance and almost like soul and disco focused. So I think that's sort of the same thing here with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. They're seeing their partnership as composers on movies as its own thing. Nine Inch Nails is a completely different creative venture for them, channeling different things. And I think that's what it is essentially.
Okay. Very exciting. Either way, I'm excited to hear what they bring to that movie. I am getting excited for it. I don't know what to make of, some of the choices they made, like as far as like who's directing it, producing it,
casting and all that stuff too. And apparently the fact that most of it doesn't even take place in Tron, from what I understand.
Yeah,
I think it's about people. I think it's about like programs from the Tron world making their way into the real world,
which aligns with the ending of Legacy. So
yeah, it does.
But you're also talking about a completely different cast that doesn't tie to Legacy. So how does that tie in with Jeff Bridges' character, if at all? I think he's supposed to be in the film.
Yeah.
I will say, look, Greta Lee is starring in it. That is exciting enough for me. And Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some of the casting here is very promising. So.
Yeah. I will say, to maybe cap off this conversation, that Disney is in trouble when the sequel they've announced that I think I'm most interested in is Freakier Friday.
I don't have an opinion. I don't have a thought on that.
I actually like that first Freaky Friday. I think it's pretty good.
All right, real quick before we move on, I just want to note the Joaquin Phoenix controversy as well. And this is unfortunate because I've always really liked Joaquin Phoenix. He's always been one of my favorite actors. And what he decided to do was not great. I mean, pulling out days before shooting and a Joaquin Phoenix, Todd Haynes collaboration. And given what they've said about this film as far as pushing boundaries is exciting as well. And it's the irony of it all, right? This was a Joaquin Phoenix idea. He brought this to Todd Haynes.
If we take that word at face value, that is true, that he brought this idea to Todd Haynes and the producers, and in many ways contracted himself to be the one to play this role that no one else could. I mean, that is a very low and selfish move, even if it is based on quote unquote cold feet, as
whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means. I really don't know.
And I kind of wonder, this is complete speculation, wholly theorizing, so don't quote me on this. But I do wonder if he had someone in his ear that heard about the boundaries that he was attempting to push with this film, and with Joker, the sequel to Joker coming out, and whatever Oscar potential is with that, or Oscar potential moving forward, that a film like this could somehow like ruin his career or make the Academy feel like he's not worthy of being considered in the like. It feels like that to me. I just don't see Joaquin Phoenix completely bailing on this film on his own terms. Now, again, that could be completely presumptuous of me. I don't know, but to me, this reads like there's someone in his ear giving him really bad advice.
There's more to the story here. You're absolutely right.
I just think there's more. Yeah.
There's more, and it's most likely going to be more that we'll never hear about.
Yeah.
And
let me be clear on this as well. That is not to excuse his choices.
Yeah.
I just wonder if there's more to the story than what's being told. That's all I'm trying to say. It does not excuse him bailing on this project and leaving all of these people jobless. There's already a bunch of money that has been spent in pre-production and getting ready for this film to shoot, and it's not great. It is not great, and I hope that he finds a remedy to it, whether it's coming out of his own pocket or whatever the case may be. I know some people brought up the Bruce Willis thing, where he bailed on some Disney project. I forget the movie. So they forced him to make 3 movies, and 2 of those movies ended up being Armageddon and The Sixth Sense, which combined made almost $1 billion. So he more than made up for the $17 million he cost Disney.
Well, okay, so he did
by
it in the
pulling
right
out of
way.
it.
There was a right business move there, but yeah, we'll see if Joaquin's able to,
So
travel through the same thing.
I don't know what caused it, obviously, but I do hope that he makes up for it. Because
I do too.
I really like the guy. I want to root for him. He named his
I do
kid
too.
River.
Oh, maybe
You know?
he did. He did. Maybe this is another one of those what was it? I'm still here documentary experiments he did. Remember that?
Yes.
I wonder if maybe he's got some other type of trick up his sleeve, which that is
Maybe.
if that is the case, I might even respect him less. If people's jobs are genuinely affected by whatever he
Yes,
has
and
up
that's
his
it. We know that's the case.
Yeah.
Whether it was for art and experimentation, I don't think it was that.
I don't think it was. No.
I think he has a bad actor in his ear. And look, he still made the choice. Even with people in his ear talking, he could have done the project and committed to his own story that he brought to the table.
Right.
And I read that it couldn't be recast because they only greenlit the project because
with him in mind. Yeah.
it was sold on him, being the center star there. So
Right. Exactly.
yeah, unfortunate. Yeah, it was a bad move, bad decision.
Well, I hope it works out. I hope he comes back.
I agree. All right, Brennan, let's talk about coffee.
Nature's
Everyone
medicine right there.
loves coffee. It is absolutely nature's medicine. We all need it. We all love it. These days, it is my breakfast. I don't tend to eat too much in the morning, but I'll have 2, 3, 6 cups of coffee as one does.
That's it.
Hey, it's on the low end.
The warmth will sometimes trick you into thinking you're being satiated by some type of food. So it's in a way, it's like
Caffeine
your way of
keeps you
intermittent.
full?
Hey, it's intermittent fasting right there, right? Especially black coffee. It doesn't it's not clouded by any other preservatives or additives. Coffee cult as just black coffee tastes so good.
That's
so good.
And the reason you can do that is because we're talking about specialty grade coffee.
That's right.
We're not talking about bad coffee or specialty grade that might have some great beans and some not great beans all kind of mixed in, as a lot of companies tend to do.
Right.
Coffee Cult goes the extra mile. They only use perfect, great green coffee in their roast. So, and they have specific roasting profiles to bring out the best flavors. It really is the best coffee that money can buy. They have all kinds of different blends that you can check out. They got great single origin coffees, whatever you like. It's all there. It is delicious. You don't have to add any sort of frou-frou nonsense to it.
You don't have to, not caffeinated milk. It's just coffee.
Just
coffee.
It's great. I mean, some of these coffees have natural flavors of strawberries and blueberries or chocolate and oat, whatever you want out of your coffee, you can certainly get it with Coffee Cult. So right now,
knowing that it comes from ethically sourced farms,
and it's all ethically
really,
sourced. Absolutely. That is a big part of it as well. So go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF24, and at checkout, you'll get 15% off. Again, that code is ISF24, and you'll get 15% off.
Woo.
Go check them out. That's coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about audiobooks. I love a good audiobook. It is, these days anyway, mainly how I read my novels.
For many, it's like a great podcast.
Me, but
it's like a great podcast, just
it is.
with, a story, with a narrative.
A story.
Yeah.
And Audible is great because they have a bajillion titles. They have so many titles.
It's overwhelming.
For you to choose from.
It's a great problem to have, really.
Yeah, whether you want something supernatural or fantasy, maybe you want something practical like learning a new language or marketing or business, whatever it is, they have a ton of books on there that you can check out for iPhone and Android and everything in between. It's fantastic. Last year I went through don't tell anyone, but I went through all of the Harry Potter books.
Yeah, that was a fun exercise for you, wasn't it?
It was extremely fun. Again, don't tell anyone. And this year, I'm going through all of The Hobbit, not The Hobbit, I guess I could go through The Hobbit.
You
Going through
could,
The Lord
yeah.
of the Rings.
The Hobbit's actually very good. I do recommend that one.
I might have to do The Hobbit as well.
Yeah.
I skipped that though. I went straight to Lord of the Rings.
And I could see why, because you get to hear the lovely voice of Andy Serkis when you listen to those Lord of the Rings books.
Exactly. I absolutely love it. So, and he's very good at that. The man can go through the voices.
He's so good at that.
Oh man, it's amazing.
Yeah.
At any rate, go check out Audible. It is a great source if you're like me and you can only get through books in audio form because you got 2 kids and a busy life.
It's understandable, man.
Go to Audible. It is the best. If you go to audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm. Again, that link is audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm. Go to that link and you'll get a free audiobook and 30 days for free.
Yeah.
Again, a free audiobook, 30-day free trial. It's fantastic. I love it. Cannot recommend it enough. Again, audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm. And we thank Audible for their support. Okay, so to circle back to the beginning of the show, we talked about reevaluating movies. And we dove a little bit into the pool before climbing our way out.
Yeah.
But now we're back, swimming in the deep end here. Obviously, we're sort of basing this off The Village and Miami Vice, as we noted earlier. Tony Scott has been reevaluated quite a bit in recent years.
Absolutely.
Really, in recent weeks and months, even.
Yeah.
He's been a big talking point in 2024. So, where do you want to start this, Brennan? I know you wanted to bring up some of our favorite movies that are falling under this umbrella, that are being reevaluated. So,
there are many. There are
so
many. I don't even know where we want to start. I mean, you could look at one of the most classic examples of a movie that was not very well received at the time and then became arguably one of Hitchcock's best films, and that's Vertigo. That was sort of mixed and maybe one of the earliest examples we can think of in this conversation that did get its own reevaluation. And of course, we weren't there to experience it. We grew up knowing that Vertigo was a classic and one of the greatest movies ever made. I always have that mentality for it. I don't have any different context, but apparently when that first came out, it was a different experience. You know, people didn't really know what to make of that movie at the time. And, you know, in a way, it's also a movie that falls into a similar conversation we were having on our latest VIP bonus content about unlikable characters and how that can work for your movie. Scotty Ferguson, not a likable character in Vertigo.
No.
He's a creepy guy when you really think about it. But that adds a level of pity and a sadness and a melancholy to that film that I think people started to recognize maybe a little bit earlier than some of these other examples that we might bring up. But that's where I at least wanted to start, to maybe kind of do this as like a slight ordering of events in some ways. But I do think that Vertigo is a great early example of this.
Yeah, that is that's a great example. I love that film. That is probably my favorite Hitchcock film to date.
It's mine, yeah. Although, I mean, I know you love Rear Window quite a bit as well.
I do. But I do think Vertigo is my favorite, and I think it's an incredible film that, honestly, not only does it look great, it is one of the best shot films in Hitchcock's filmography. The performances are great, but thematically speaking, it's also so thought-provoking and applicable to today. And I think that's what's so fascinating, especially when you consider the toxicity of what we see online and this idea of trying to manifest fantasy into reality and the lengths that people are willing to go to. It is creepy. It is extremely gray. And that's putting it, lightly.
Kind of an ugly film.
Oftentimes there are pretty heavy ramifications, I'll say, to how we see that manifest even today. And I do love how this film goes about exploring those ideas. I don't know if Hitchcock had any sort of time machine to see how the social media age would evolve, but holy Lord, that film speaks to today more so than many other films to come out of that era. So
It's very ahead of its
it's
time, and
incredible.
I couldn't help but think of that after we got done talking about M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, which feels very much ripped from the Alfred Hitchcock playbook. Movies like Suspicion and North by Northwest.
Yeah.
Vertigo's a very different experience, but I couldn't help but think about that film and thinking of its history and how it was a box office
Mhm.
failure at the time, and I believe received pretty mixed reviews from some of those critics at the time too, and now
Mhm.
is seen as many people do cite it as Hitchcock's best film, and I certainly see why. It's certainly my favorite as well.
Yeah, great film. I love it as well. Something I thought about as it relates to this conversation earlier today, and it ties to what we were just talking about as it relates to Disney and D23, because
Okay.
a series of films, I'm branching out here beyond just one film, but a
Okay.
collective. Movies that are being reevaluated.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. I know where you're going
Marvel
with this.
Phase 1.
Oh, that's okay. That's not where I thought you were going with this, but I think
Marvel
that's a
Phase
great
1.
point. I thought you were going to say the prequel trilogy, Star Wars, which is
No.
it is getting reevaluated in a way, though.
It
But
is being reevaluated. I don't wholly agree with the reevaluation.
I do think Revenge of the Sith is very good. But
Revenge of the
okay,
but
yeah,
I've always
yeah,
been positive
yeah,
on that
yeah.
movie.
But yeah, I mean that's a different kind of reevaluation because
Yeah.
that's an example of a trilogy that had a vision from beginning, middle, and end, which is not what you can say about the sequel trilogy. But that's a very different conversation. Anyway, Marvel
Yes.
Phase 1
Marvel Phase 1.
might be their
That's
best
really what I
phase.
wanted to talk about here. Because during the Infinity Saga, especially as we were
Mhm.
gearing up for Infinity War and Endgame, and I don't think Phase 1 has the highest of highs, but there's a consistency and a craft that has clearly dissipated since then.
They look so big. They feel like
Yeah.
events. And maybe it's
Yeah.
because they were so new and fresh at the time that no movie's cinematic universe was doing anything like that. There was no cinematic universe just
Yeah.
yet. But
Yeah.
even so, like you look at how those movies were made back then versus now, like those movies in Phase 1 felt like movies. Like they felt
Yeah.
expensive and
Yeah.
artistic and like
Yeah.
visualized in such a great way.
They're making choices, and you don't always see that with today's MCU.
Mhm.
And I think that's why they are being reevaluated. There's been some recent talk about Captain America, the first Avenger, which I think is one of the most unique looking films in the MCU and the entire
Yeah.
MCU. Joe Johnston, I think, brought a visual flair and a style that is not just distinctive, but I think works really well for that film. I just
I think that
love
might
its
be his
comic
best film.
booky.
I'm
Yeah,
not yeah,
it
I'm
very
not the
well
biggest
could.
fan of Joe Johnson as a filmmaker, but it's interesting. They gave him this money to make a Captain America movie, and he more or less made a spiritual sequel to The Rocketeer, which I thought was great.
Yeah, it's really great. And
Yeah.
obviously, it launched Chris Evans into this
Mhm.
different stratosphere. I think Tommy Lee Jones is having a ball, even if he didn't want to be there. And I don't think
He
he
is
did, but he's committed
yeah,
and having a great time. And I do like his presence in the film.
yeah,
So like the first Avengers is
yeah, so
great.
good.
I've been very vocal about Branagh's Thor film. It is a very Kenneth Branagh movie. And I love
Yeah.
its emotional stakes. I love its characters. Obviously, we're introduced to Loki, who would become such a big part of the MCU over the years.
Mhm.
And that first Iron Man, which launched all of this, is just fantastic and still
It's a
holds up
great movie.
wildly well.
Such a great movie. Oh my gosh, I look back at my ranking for the year 2008 and some of my favorite films there, and I actually think I have Iron Man slightly above The Dark Knight.
Don't tell anyone that.
Oh, I'll tell people that. I'm proud of that opinion. I love both films, but there's something
Yeah.
about the playfulness of Iron Man that just gravitates to me more.
That's good. I mean, I don't have it ranked higher than The Dark Knight, but I did have both in my top 20.
Sure.
I think that Iron Man film from 2008 is quite good, and
Yeah.
I might be a little on an island here, and this isn't being reevaluated, but because it is Phase 1, it does. I think still play a part of the conversation, and that's the Incredible Hulk. I've always liked that film more than most people seem to. And I do love that Marvel, because forever it felt like my criticism of the MCU was, why are we treating the Incredible Hulk like it doesn't exist?
Well, now we're finally getting back to
They're
it.
finally embracing it over the last few years, which has been exciting.
Yeah.
But I did really like that film, and
honestly,
really,
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just to finish it out real fast, like Iron Man 2 was the only film on here that
That's what I was gonna say.
That I don't think is great, but I've even seen some tweets, some comments on social media about at least certain aspects of it that people do seem to appreciate. Maybe the addition of Don Cheadle certainly had people excited. But that's the only film of Phase 1 that is okay. That was a little bit of a misstep.
Yeah.
The rest of these I've always really liked, but I do feel like lately, because of where the MCU has gone, people look back at this and go, you know what? There is something special about Phase 1 and how distinct
felt like
those
movies.
are.
They felt like movies. And not to say that Phase 4 and even Phase 5 needed to repeat what Phases 1 and 2 did respectively, but I think after the finality of Endgame, Phase 4 needed to take things back to basics and introduce new things in a smaller way like Phase 1 did, as opposed to getting bogged down by the excess of Disney Plus content and all these other movies surrounding that too, and how there was like this everything just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it couldn't sustain itself. I miss that smallness and the fact that these movies looked amazing. Like they looked like movies. And you're right. Iron Man 2 is really the only misstep. And in a weird way, aside from the introduction of Don Cheadle as Rhodey, you don't really need to watch Iron Man 2. In a way, like even when Scarlett Johansson's Natasha is reintroduced in the Avengers from 2012, it almost feels like a new introduction for that character. Like you could be seeing her for the first time and it still works. It almost renders her inclusion in Iron Man 2 kind of meaningless in a way.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was an intentional retcon or not, but if you skip over Iron Man 2 and just watch the remaining films, you've got a great phase. You have a really great phase.
Yeah, it's quite wonderful. So I'm glad to see that getting reevaluated these days. That's been good.
We talked a lot about this during our VIP bonus content. We sort of got a little sidetracked from the topic of unlikable characters, even though they did play into this franchise a little bit. But a franchise that I feel like is starting to get reevaluated even further now is the Alien franchise. And I say that in the way, I mean, Alien and Aliens are always going to be classics. And we all knew that Alien 3 had its fans. But we're seeing a lot more defenders for Prometheus and Alien Covenant now, and I'm seeing a lot more defenders for Alien Resurrection now, and it just goes to show the landscape of Hollywood and how it shifts and how it can force us to look back on how movies and content were being created at a different time and how it just felt more like artistically realized. It felt more like there was conviction there with whatever director or creator was doing. And in a case like Alien Resurrection, I mean, I want to go back and revisit that film now. I know it's not a good movie, but man, is that thing gross. And it has a vision that most other movies are not even, like most movies are afraid to go for. And like that's another example. In a way, it kind of fits into the same points you were making about Marvel Phase 1, that there's a lostness to the artistic process that we're not seeing anymore, that when we look back on something that maybe isn't very good, it retroactively starts to feel good again because it represents a different time capsule in many ways.
You know what's really funny about all of that is the film that I have on my list you didn't even mention, but I have Alien 3 on my list.
Well, I mean, I did mention it, but I guess, no, you're right. That does fit this criteria, but I'm starting to see it so heavily mentioned as a movie that people just like now that it almost seems like it's not even part of the argument anymore. But at the same time, we look back on this Alien 3 as a movie that did get quite a bit of a resurgence, and does fit that criteria for sure.
I guess the criteria here might have to go, how far back do you want to go?
That's true.
Because at the beginning of InSession Film in 2013, I would say that Alien 3 was not in that conversation at all.
Yeah, now that was Alien Resurrection.
Its reevaluation has taken place during the lifetime of this show.
That's fair, yeah.
So there is something to be said about Alien 3 and how people look back on it. Even when we did that retrospective some years ago, and that was, 2017? I don't know if it had fully gone through the reevaluation at that point. Perhaps when Covenant was coming out, maybe it was around that time. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but we like the film.
I think it's quite good, and people do go back at Alien 3, and there's been a reevaluation of it. At least the assembly cut, the theatrical cut, as we all know, is quite terrible. Yeah. But the assembly cut absolutely offers a context and a nuance that is genuinely fascinating, and it is exciting to look at Ripley and her arc and how it crystallizes in Alien 3. And I think it's quite good. Like, on the whole, I'm a fan of Alien 3, the assembly.
It's a great trilogy. It's a great trilogy there.
It is very good. It's still a flawed movie, but one that I'm willing to wrestle with because of how it crystallizes her arc in that trilogy. And the first two films are obviously masterpieces, and it's really hard to make three masterpieces in a row. I mean, David Fincher was working against the clock from the very beginning. There was no way. And as much as I love Fincher, and David Fincher today, if he could go back in time and remake that movie in 1992 with how he is today as a filmmaker, who knows, maybe he would make it 3 for 3, but
he probably would, but at the same time, I kind of like that the movie exists as it is, because then it allowed us to get the David Fincher that we got today. Yeah. For how much he even disowns it, I don't even think it's his worst movie. If I were to rank David Fincher's filmography, there's at least one or two I might put below it. I think Alien 3 it's one of those movies that has been reevaluated for many reasons that we reevaluate other movies, is that there's just something so inherently interesting and intriguing about the effort that it makes you look at that aspect of it, and it almost saves the movie. Because in many ways, even with the assembly cut, I don't think it's a great movie, but it has so many compelling ideas and so many interesting intentions.
I agree.
And that really does save it.
I agree. Yeah, no. So I really like that film a lot. Have been it has been exciting to see that film picked up and reevaluated over the years. I don't know if I have too much to say about Prometheus and Covenant at this point. We did talk about it quite a bit on this week's bonus content, to plug that one more time, but I am not fans of those movies. Maybe I'll join the reevaluation once I'm able to catch up with them. I don't know. Prometheus I could see coming around perhaps. But I just don't know about that screenplay because it's so disjointed and messy. Yeah. Covenant I'm extremely dubious about because its nihilism is so potent and vigorous that I don't ever see myself coming around on Covenant. I could be wrong. I don't want to lock myself into a box, but that is a nihilistic film that hates its audience and its characters, and I find it hollow. I don't find myself coming around on that one.
I cannot wait to hear your reaction if you do rewatch it. Like we talked about on that bonus content, I don't expect you to fully come around on it, but I'd be very curious to hear what your new reaction is, if anything, if there is anything new that you have to it.
Anything else you have on your list? What else you want to talk about?
Oh, there's plenty. We talked about this movie as well during our VIP bonus content about unlikable characters, but Martin Scorsese is someone that's so good at crafting unlikable characters in a compelling way. The King of Comedy, I feel like, is the Scorsese film that people are starting to recognize might be among his best movies. And admittedly, it is my favorite, but I'm starting to see that as kind of a consensus now, which I didn't think was really the case, at least not 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's another one of those Alien 3 kind of things where it hasn't, like, I don't think that's like a this year or last year kind of thing, but over the last 10 years, you've like slowly started to see that creep higher and higher on people's lists.
Yeah.
And it's gone from being, you always saw Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and Goodfellas, and look, nothing against those films. I'm not trying to diminish them at all, but it does feel like the king of comedy just wasn't talked about as much, and now it's slowly creeping up in everyone's top fives at the very least.
I'm noticing that a lot more with Martin Scorsese in general. It's kind of like with Ridley Scott. He's got these heavy hitters like Alien and Blade Runner and Gladiator and Thelma and Louise and Black Hawk Down, now The Last Duel and some others that we don't often talk about the many other films that he has directed. And in many ways, there's a reason for that. But in the case of Martin Scorsese, like outside of the king of comedy, I'm starting to see more people start talking about, oh, After Hours, that's great. Oh, The Age of Innocence, that's great. Bringing Out the Dead, that's great. Mean Streets, which Mean Streets was always kind of part of that conversation. Silence, I think, is, but that's another great example. Martin Scorsese is someone that was so known for these particular high highs that we often forgot just how almost equally high these other films are. And in some cases, I think some of these other films are even better than some of his most famous films. And that's like in a way, almost like Martin Scorsese as a filmmaker can fall into this conversation as well, at least regarding some of his, the movies that aren't Taxi Driver or Goodfellas or Raging Bull, right? They almost fall into that kind of category as well.
No, I think Scorsese is another great option here. The King of Comedy is one of my very favorite Scorsese films, if it isn't my number one. And yeah, I think it also might be Robert De Niro's best performance.
I think it is.
Crazy to say.
Nowadays, I don't think it is. I think
it might have been
15 years ago it may have been. Because I know The King of Comedy as a movie was similar to Vertigo, not very well received at the time, and I think was a bit of a box office flop.
It did flop at the box office, that is for sure.
But man, it's I think we as an audience have just become more in tune with what Martin Scorsese was trying to do with that film.
Yeah, we've embraced it.
We've embraced it, and newer critical minds were able to recognize what that movie was doing that maybe critics at the time were just, I don't want to say oblivious to. They weren't able to sense that at that time, which again, proof of how a movie can sometimes be ahead of the curve. And that movie was.
Yeah, that happens often where people see a movie, we see a movie, and we might embrace it to some degree or another, but it takes time for it to really sit with us and really like waft over us the quality of it. And like Citizen Kane was that wasn't received as the best film to ever be made in 1941 when it came out, but give it a decade or two and people are like, that Citizen Kane movie was actually quite great. Maybe we should have awarded it Best Picture.
It was a head scratcher for people at that time. Orson Welles was doing some really clever things that no one would even think of.
100%.
And sometimes those are the best examples of movies that do age like fine wine when they're received in a way where you might think, okay, that was good, but I think it trips over something in the process. And then you realize, oh no, this is just really interesting and creative. And this director is going for something that I didn't sense at the time. And sometimes maybe in a certain case, it could be two filmmakers working simultaneously on a certain project. Just recently, IndieWire released their 100 best films of the 2000s. I don't know if you got a chance to read that yet.
I'm so mad at them for stealing that idea from us.
I know.
I cannot believe IndieWire would do that.
And
how
of course,
dare you?
Well, I don't want to spoil what movies we're going to be talking about in our respective top 10s for the decade. The decade of the 2000s specifically. But guess what movie they had at number one?
There Will Be Blood.
No. AI, artificial intelligence.
Oh, see, that was going to be the next film I wanted to bring up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because AI, well, and here's another thing. So how dare you, IndieWire, for stealing our idea for best of the decade? The other thing is I am taking, and by I mean we,
Yeah.
Brendan and I'm taking credit on Brendan and I's behalf for AI. We started the reevaluation of AI when we did that review a few years ago.
Yeah, well,
So you are welcome, everybody.
I've been talking about that film even before you got to revisit it, right?
Well, I mean,
I think,
I've always been a big fan of it. I mean, before we did the review, we've talked. We talked about it. We had it on many top 3 lists prior to that conversation. There was no secret about where we stood on that film heading into that review.
I've been vocal about AI since I joined InSession Film back in 2014.
Yeah.
Although, and again, I can't take credit for it because I do recall at the time some critics were putting it on their best of that decade list, even around that time. So I knew it was starting to, the conversation was
There were
starting.
people ahead of the curve.
Yeah. We can't take full credit for its revival, but we can take some credit for its revival.
Well, I think we can take credit for the revival. What you're talking about are critics that already knew.
Yeah.
But they were far and few in between. They were in the minority.
Sure.
What we kick-started was the revival. Was that, hey, this movie is actually good.
Yeah. And then we had our good friends like Jay Ledbetter watching it again and having a devastating experience with it and recognize, hey, this is actually one of Spielberg's best movies. Yeah. But that's another great example of movies that have been reevaluated over the years, especially knowing the context of how it was made and people acknowledging that the Spielbergian things that people thought were Spielberg were not, and vice versa.
That ending is devastating.
That's the thing. Yeah, if you look at that movie for what it is, you realize it is the saddest movie Spielberg has ever made. It really is. It's bleak as hell.
Up there with War Horse. Yeah.
War Horse is a very bleak movie. You're right. Like that movie was again that movie was misinterpreted at the time as a very playful and fluffy kind of dog movie in a way. But no, that is a devastating war movie. And
I'm trying to kickstart the reevaluation. I don't think we're quite there yet. I've seen some people come around. I'm not quite alone as I used to be, but we got a ways to go on the War Horse reevaluation.
Is it out of the question? Is it out of the question if I say that I think War Horse is even bleaker than Saving Private Ryan?
No, I don't think you're. No, I think it. Yeah, I mean, because Saving Private Ryan, while it does maintain a dolefulness throughout that film, and there is a lot of death and devastation, of course. But the end of that film, there is, well, I guess I was going to make an argument you can make for a War Horse. I will say I think War Horse at its darkest moments is more brutal than Saving Private Ryan.
It's a different kind of brutality.
Even if Saving Private Ryan has the most graphic violence of the two with that opening sequence.
Yeah.
And that is devastating. Don't get me wrong. It is also brutal to watch.
Physical bleakness as opposed to internalized bleakness, which I think
and
War
that's
Horse
the thing,
is the latter of.
You don't get the graphic violence in War Horse, but the brutality that we see comes through characters that we are experiencing it with. The opening scene is just a bunch of carnage with characters we don't know who they are. We've never met them. Like there's just a general humanity that makes us devastated for those characters.
Sure.
You got a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds getting slaughtered, and even though I don't know who that person is, your
the idea of it is what
the idea of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And War Horse, we know those characters.
Sure.
Like we experienced the whole movie with that horse, and so when it gets to its worst, there's an emotional impact that I feel like goes harder.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And there's something about that movie, War Horse in particular, that it just handles that internalized brutality in such a way that, you're right. Let's start the War Horse assance, if you want to call it that.
And I think that's where, I don't know if I want to say misinterpretation or I don't want to, come off and say that people are wrong for feeling the way they do about a movie. But I do think some of the general discourse around that film or the general feeling around War Horse is the bookends. The bookends of the film admittedly are a little cloying, a little Spielberg sentimentality,
They're very saccharine. Yeah, I mean, the whole first
but
act is essentially Old Yeller in a way.
everything in between, though, everything in between the bookends of the film are extremely brutal.
That tank scene
Really bleak.
is devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think people forget that because you
Yeah.
think about the sentimentality of those bookends, but
Hey,
everything in the middle,
you could say the same.
It is really arduous.
You could say the same thing about Saving Private Ryan. Some people have latched onto the bookends of that film. They sometimes forget the brutality of what's in between.
Yeah, it's true.
So
Yeah.
so Spielberg has a way of deconstructing bookends, I guess. But
Absolutely.
anyway, that's a long way of saying AI, artificial intelligence, is certainly one that fits this conversation. Might even
Definitely
be the
on my
most
list.
premier example of this in many ways.
Absolutely. All right, another film on my list, and I pose this as a question.
Okay.
Because I feel like I've seen this, but maybe I haven't seen it enough for it to qualify. I don't know. I'm curious where you sit. If you feel the same, then maybe I can remove the question mark. The Matrix sequels.
I think that's a great question.
Because I've seen some. I've definitely seen enough, but maybe not enough. Maybe like War Horse, maybe it has a little ways to go. I don't know.
I need to try to separate my feelings of the Matrix
just
sequels.
Be my subjective bias.
I don't know, because I do actually think there are people coming around on the Matrix Reloaded, especially the second one. I think if of any of the Matrix sequels, that's the one that best qualifies for this talking point here. I'm not sure if I'm seeing it for the Matrix Revolutions, the third one specifically. And I think we might be a little bit too. It might be a little bit too soon to say we're seeing it for the Matrix Resurrections, the fourth one, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that in another 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, that one is to be determined. I agree on that one. I guess I was really more talking about the
2 and 3. Okay.
Yeah, 2 and 3.
I think your pick there is valid, especially for the second one, The Matrix Reloaded. I think that's the one that is getting people talking. I still see mixed feelings about the third one. Again, that might just be me because I don't care for the third one, but I actually think the second one, Reloaded, is the best Matrix movie. So that could just be my my biased interpretation coming into this and clouding my judgment. But I think there's an argument there for sure.
Yeah, I think they're both quite good. Reloaded is especially really good. I know that when we talked about these films, I can't even remember what the episode was, but this was a few years ago. I think it was 2021. We revisited these films. Maybe it was because Ryan and Jay were doing.
Oh, they were doing, I think, a Wachowski sisters.
Wachowski series. Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah.
But I do remember we talked about it here on the show, and while forever it felt like people simply pretended that the sequels didn't exist, when I was rewatching these films, it blew my mind that was ever a sentiment for people, because Reloaded is just as good as the first one. I don't blame you for saying that it's better than that original Matrix. I can't quite go that far, but I do think it's at the very least just as good. There's one moment that holds it back for me, where you get the courtyard scene, and
the Agent Smith fight, that goes on
Express level bad.
I think everyone agrees is the biggest problem with that movie.
Yes.
But at the time, I remember people being really disappointed by the finale of Reloaded and the whole scene with the architect, because no one knew what the heck he was talking about.
Like, what's going on here?
Now, in context, what he's talking about is not really all that complex. And the ideas that movie is presenting are very interesting. And I think people are starting to recognize that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really great though. I think Reloaded is as good as the first one, aside from that courtyard scene. But yeah, there's a lot about the dialogue, the world building, the way that film builds, the like the storytelling and the way characters evolve. It's just all fantastic.
Well,
I think it's
I think
wonderful.
I think it's a great pick because another example of a movie that is being reevaluated, a Wachowski film, Speed Racer.
Speed Racer. That's another one that very much qualifies here. Seen a
Yeah.
lot of that lately.
Yeah.
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 Ab-
I want to give that
absolutely.
one I want to give that one a revisit, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I have a hunch I'm gonna join the club on that one. I
I
feel
think
like
so
that's
too.
I think
Yeah,
I
I think
am.
that's
Yeah.
what I'm gonna like as well. I haven't seen
Yeah.
it in quite a few years. I don't even know if
Yeah.
I've seen it since it came out in 2008 or 9, whenever that came to theaters.
I think it was
But
2007 if I'm not mistaken.
7. Okay, so
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna come around. I don't know if I'll be as high as Ryan and Jay. I know they champion that film as one of the best of the
Oh,
decade.
and
I don't know
fun
if they go that
fact,
high, but
that also appeared on IndieWire's 100 Best of the Decade.
well, there you go.
So
So I will have to give that a go
yeah.
because that was not on my list for 2008 whenever we did that retrospective. So
Yeah, we were a little
we'll
ignorant to it, I think.
we'll need to see if I can give that one another go here in the next couple of weeks as we get ready
Mhm.
for our best of the decade. But I did think about the Matrix sequels because I do feel like I've seen more talk about them in recent years.
Okay.
And Resurrections was maybe a little polarized, but it was generally well received. I don't know if people loved it. Some people really did. Some people think it is one of the best Matrix movies. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think we're a few years from that one having a reevaluation, but I think people are
I
at the very
I
least talking about 2 and 3.
I think time will be kind to Resurrections. I really do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. What else? Where do you want to go now?
I'm trying to think because we're running low on time, so we probably have to
I have one I want to bring up here.
Okay, cuz I have
And
5 left that I was probably just going to state as ones that could be
okay,
part of this, but I don't really
okay,
have I don't I guess I get for time's sake, I don't think we need to spend too much time on them.
sure,
And they're all very disconnected. They're just other examples of movies that I think are going
yeah,
through a resurgence or movies that are probably going to go through a resurgence at some point. We're still pretty fresh on
yeah,
them. But very recently we got a remake of Roadhouse.
yep,
And that 80s movie, I think, is going through something similar. I think it's
hmm,
actually a very fun and cheesy, awesome movie. So I think that's one there. And a few others here. Michael Bay's Pain and Gain. I think also
yep. Pain
going
and
through
Gain,
a bit of a resurgence as well.
yep. Bad Boys 2 I have on my list as
Okay.
well.
I think that
People
also
talking about
qualifies.
how it's this incredibly ugly reflection of America, which it is, and
Mhm.
among many
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. A few others I have here that are at least Steven Soderbergh related, one being directed by him, one within his wheelhouse, but the second Magic Mike movie, Magic Mike XXL, I think is one that's being recognized a bit more highly as time goes on, especially the hangouty vibes of it, I think are just more relevant nowadays. Um
yeah. I'm
Also
waiting
a
for the
movie I love.
Solaris one.
Actually that's another do you have that on your list? That's another great
No,
example.
because I don't think it's, well, maybe a little bit, but I think it's in that warhorse camp of it has a ways to go.
Okay.
I don't think collectively it's getting the same kind of reevaluation as some of these others. But I
Yeah,
hope
that's fair.
one day it does.
And I think Magic Mike XXL is one that I think has a ways to go, but I sense the early start to that. I sense the early
Yeah.
narrative there.
There's definitely
So
more talk and praise of that film than
then there
some of
was when it
these
first came
others.
out. Yeah.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
and related to Soderbergh, I think you could say the same thing about a movie like Ocean's 12, which I know you're not the biggest fan of by comparison to the other two in that trilogy.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people are starting to come around on Ocean's 12 as being sort of this like secret quasi French New Wave film that isn't really part of the French New Wave movement. And I do think it's a really interesting movie. The last example I have, and it's one of those examples where it's still too new for us to decide if it's going to be a movie that gets reevaluated over the years, but I can sense it could go in that direction, similar to the Matrix Resurrections. I think Jordan Peele's Nope might fall into that category,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is a movie that is very well received. It was very praised when it first came out, but a lot of people saw it as maybe the lesser of his three films. I think that's going to change. I think that's the one that people are going to maybe look back on as that was actually just as good as Get Out. I for different reasons, but I think that one's having an early narrative that could carry itself in that way maybe 10 years from now.
Yeah, see, that one is tricky to me because I want to say that film is already there. Most of what I see on that film, now it could just be my circle, which is why I say tricky, because I don't know how large this is or how wide the net is. But when I see people talk about Nope, I see people talk about it as if it's one of the best films of the decade so far. So it is getting some really high praise. But again, maybe those are individuals in a minority. I don't really know. I think Nope is really great. I will say this. I see that sentiment enough that when I talk about Get Out as his best film or my favorite film of his still, I feel like I'm in a minority. I do, honestly.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. And maybe just because I'm so vocal about Nope being his best film that you're always hearing it from me.
So I don't know. Like I see Nope being talked about in that vein pretty often. So if the trajectory of my circle is indicative, then I think that film is already there.
That's a fair point. And that's why I was a little bit cautious with how I said that, because it's either too early or you're right. It's kind of there for many people. So where do you separate that? But it's almost like it went through that same resurgence we keep talking about with these other films, but in a span of like 3 months or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because because that weekend that Nope came out, I feel like the consensus was that it was good, but the lesser of the 3 Jordan Peele films, and then that changed. Maybe in the span of like a
for a lot of people it did, and that's the thing. Like personally, I still feel like it might be number 3, but I think all 3 are great. Like you know. I'm almost at a point where I'm like, order them however you want. I don't care.
Jordan, I think we're at a point now where we can realize that Jordan Peele rocks.
Yeah. Real quickly, I won't get into these a whole lot. I mentioned Bad Boys 2. I also had Top Gun on my list as well. I feel like that's obviously a beloved film, but I think in recent years, it's being talked about as more than just a summer blockbuster-y kind of thing.
There's a thematic subtext to that movie that I think is now being discovered.
Yeah. Speaking of blockbusters, another one I had on here was that original Pirates trilogy. And the reason I wanted to have it on here, not just that first film, but I think the sequels, at least 2 and 3. Again, the rest of them don't exist. But Pirates 2 and 3, also very good. Yeah. And while the visual effects on those films are certainly a big talking point, because it is incredible how awesome those films still look all these years later.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
I think generally people are starting to look at those films beyond just the popcorn entertainment of it all. Not that they're not on the level of a Jordan Peele, but the characters and the storytelling, there's something really sharp and crisp about it all that those 3 films as a collective whole kind of transcend your typical blockbuster. And it's a really fascinating trilogy that I think is being reevaluated in that kind of way, which is really fantastic. So I wanted to bring that up.
All 3 are great. Yeah, all 3 of them are great.
And then another one, which this might fit in that Nope category of it might be too early, but I've seen enough of it. I'm going to bring it up here. Pixar's Luca, I think, is starting to get a little bit of that. Hey, this is actually quite great. And maybe we missed the boat by this coming out when it did.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good example. The movie's great. Movie's so good. Oh my gosh. Good. I wonder if Turning Red will fall into the same conversation, because I think it
Perhaps. Should. Another film that I have on here, and this is not a reevaluation, but as I was trying to think through, okay, what are my favorite films that are being reevaluated that I think fits the criteria here? And I thought of one that I desperately wanted to be true, but I don't think that it is. So The one film I have on here as a hope, I hope this gets reevaluated fairly soon, and that is Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice.
I think PTA fans will always respect that movie. So it's really just a matter of, can it extend past just his own fans? And I don't know. I think
maybe
that
not.
movie's so cool. That movie's so cool.
I love it though. I love it. We shall see. At any rate, this was a fun conversation that we certainly
it was.
kept
Yeah,
going.
I enjoyed
Obviously,
this.
We're running low on time here, but this was a lot of fun. If you agree or disagree with any of our picks here, please let us know. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, or you can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. All right, just a real quick plug that we will have 2 reviews this week. We'll be talking about Dee Dee and the horror film Cuckoo, so you can be on the lookout for that. We'll be recording that soon. Our latest reviews of M. Night Shyamalan's Trap and The People's Joker, both of those are available. If you missed those last week, please go and give those a listen. Some really intriguing films there. There's a new Women in Session out this week. It is already live, where Kristen and Jaylon, they're joined by Brian Suspielis to talk about Montgomery Clift. They're going back to the Clift Well to talk about their favorite movies of his. And then there's a Chasing the Gold episode from last week where Shadon and Erica do a summer recap talking about their favorite summer experiences. And they should have a new episode out this week as well. So you can be on the lookout for all of that. And just a reminder one more time, our retrospective, our 2000 retrospective is in 2 weeks.
It's coming
up. Be
up.
on the lookout for that. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to give our top 10 movies of 2000. And another week after that is our best of the decade, the best of the 2000s. Suck on it, IndieWire. It was our idea first.
And then we can take a break.
Yeah. A lot of homework over the next few weeks, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So
a lot for me to still do.
Be on the lookout for that. And Brendan, I did, as we were all talking here, I did go back to look at best of the decade for the 2010s. And we did do some bonus content revisiting our year-end list for the years of the 2010s. So we kind of reevaluated our list, and then we talked about them and revealed them on that bonus content. So
you're right. We did
similar to that as well.
I think we'll have to, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait. With all of that said, I think that's it. Again, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here for this week's episode?
With our 2000 retrospective coming up, I do want to pose the question now. We don't have to answer the question now, but over under, how much are we going to cross over on that one? I think it's something
on 2000.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. That is a really good question.
Keep thinking about it.
I've talked about this before, like earlier in the year when we were doing our best of 2024 so far. Like leading up to that episode, I was like, I haven't even done the exercise of ranking my movies yet.
Yeah, I know, right?
It wasn't until like the week of where I was like, I better put these into a list.
I better try and do this, right? Yeah.
Same thing for 2000 in the sense that for months, I just had a general list. These are the movies I like. These are the movies I think will fight for my top 10 or my top 20. And then, funny you ask, earlier today, as we are recording this, for the first time, I did put them into a 20.
Okay. So you have a top 20 right now, based
on
what you've seen.
I do have a current 20. I still have some homework to do, so it could change.
Yeah.
And even if the new films I see don't crack the list, this could still all change anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Looking at this list, I think we will cross over on at least 5 of them.
You think it's going to be a 5-er?
Okay. I think it's going to be 5.
I'm looking at my top 10 as it is now. Yeah, I could see 5 being a possibility.
Yeah.
I think I have more homework to do than you do, so I'm gonna be doing some cramming.
I
in
feel
the
pretty
last,
good. Yeah, I feel pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. I still have some that I need to check out, but I think 5 seems like a safe bet. We'll see where it goes.
There are at least 3 that will absolutely cross over. 100%.
I know what two of those are that you're talking about. I'm curious what the third is.
Yeah, 3, no doubt.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident. Then there's 2 others that I'm fairly certain, but you always surprise me. So I can't say for sure with these 2. I'm confident, but I'm not sure. And then the other 5 I have on my list, I think is a toss-up. I could see you having them on your list, and I could see you not. It just kind of depends.
All right.
So
this is exciting. It's always exciting when we do this kind of speculation before we do these retrospectives.
Yeah, it's tough to say.
Yeah, for sure.
I could say more, but I want to wait till the retrospective because I don't want to get too
let's not
far into
reveal
it.
anything by accident.
Yeah, so I'll leave it at that for now, but it'll be fun to talk about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. I'm glad people are coming around on AI.
Yeah, we should reevaluate this podcast going forward.
Yeah, we should.